I was lying in a rented hospital bed in our living room when my husband rolled 2 suitcases past me. He stopped long enough to kiss my forehead, lifted my phone from the charger, and said, "42 days isn't that long, Evelyn." Then he slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. For a second I thought he was joking. Richard had a habit of doing that, saying something cruel in a calm voice, then acting surprised when I took it seriously. We had been married 26 years, and I still sometimes waited for the smile that meant he didn't really mean it. That morning, there was no smile. It was Thursday, May 8th, a little after 6 in the morning. Outside, the sky over Fischers, Indiana, was the flat gray color we get before a spring rain. Maddie, the coffee maker, had finished dripping in the kitchen. I could smell it from the living room, though I hadn't been able to drink coffee for weeks. My stomach couldn't handle much of anything by then. I had been dealing with an autoimmune flare since February. At first, I told myself it was just fatigue. I had recently retired after 31 years in public education, most of them as an elementary school principal, and I assumed my body was finally collecting payment for all those early mornings and late-night parent calls. Then my hands began swelling. My knees started giving out. By April, walking from the bedroom to the mailbox felt like crossing a parking lot in August heat. My rheumatologist, Dr. Patel, put me on prednisone and another medication that had to be taken on a strict schedule. The steroids made my face round and added weight around my middle. Richard noticed that before he noticed anything else. "You've really let yourself go," he said one night while I was trying to pull on a pair of slacks. I had laughed because I didn't know what else to do. By the first week of May, Dr. Patel had ordered home health visits 3 times a week, no driving, regular blood work, and as much rest as possible. Richard helped arrange the hospital bed downstairs, because I could no longer manage the steps safely. So, when Tyler called about his mother's 60th birthday in Italy, I assumed Richard would say no. Tyler was Richard's son from his first marriage. He was 35, lived in Chicago, and made a decent living taking photographs for real estate listings. I had helped raise him since he was 7. I sat through his middle school band concerts, paid part of his college tuition, and once drove through a snowstorm to pick him up after his car broke down outside Lafayette. Susan, his mother, had always treated me politely when other people were watching. The trip was supposed to include Rome, Florence, Bologna, and a rented villa near Lake Co. Tyler called it a family celebration. "What family?" I asked Richard after he told me. He gave me that tired look he had started using whenever I brought up something inconvenient. "Don't do this. I'm asking a reasonable question. It's Susan's birthday. Tyler wants both parents there, for 6 weeks, 42 days. As if counting it precisely made it better. I looked down at the blanket covering my swollen legs. I can't even shower without someone nearby. "You have nurses. They come 3 times a week." He folded a shirt on the dining table and placed it in his suitcase. "You sleep most of the day anyway." That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broken, not yet, just quiet. A week before the trip, Richard had brought me a blue folder and set it across my lap. "Updated insurance forms," he said, "and authorization so I can speak to your doctors while I'm gone." I was tired and my vision blurred when I read too long. But I had spent too many years reviewing school contracts to sign without looking. Halfway down the second page, I saw the words "durable financial power of attorney." "What is this?" Richard reached over and closed the folder. "It's standard. It gives you control over my accounts in case you become unable to handle things." "I'm sick, Richard. I'm not incompetent." He snatched the folder off the bed. "Forget it. I was trying to make your life easier." Over the next few days, he became strangely helpful. He said my phone battery was swelling and offered to take it to the Apple store. He left an old tablet on the nightstand, but when I tried it, the screen demanded a password I didn't know. He took both car key fobs. Because my doctor had forbidden me to drive, he told me the home health company was short-staffed and might miss a visit or 2. He unplugged the Amazon Echo in the kitchen because, according to him, it had been listening to private conversations. At the time, each thing seemed irritating but explainable. Together, they became something else. On the morning he left, he placed a small cooler beside my bed. Inside were 2 turkey sandwiches, 3 bottles of water, and a cup of applesauce. He stood over me wearing a navy travel jacket I had bought him for Christmas. "You'll be fine," he said. "I need my phone. I'll get it looked at in town before we head to the airport, then leave me yours." He laughed once under his breath. "I need my phone in Italy." I stared at him. He adjusted the handle on his suitcase. "Try not to turn this into another crisis, Evelyn." Then he left. The garage door rose, paused, and rolled shut again. For the first hour I was angry. By noon I was uneasy. At 2, no nurse had come. I tried the tablet again. Wrong password. By 4 I forced myself out of bed and gripped my walker. My legs trembled before I reached the kitchen. The house felt unusually still. No television, no dishwasher humming, just the refrigerator motor and my own breathing. I reached the counter and saw the unplugged Echo. Then I opened the drawer where we kept emergency numbers and spare keys. It was empty except for a folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it with both hands. It was a confirmation from the home health agency. Services canceled. Patient leaving the state for 6 weeks. No further visits required. Richard's electronic signature sat at the bottom. The cancellation date was 4 days before he had told me the Italy trip was final. I lowered myself into a kitchen chair and read the sentence again. That was when I understood. My husband had not simply left me alone. He had made sure nobody was scheduled to find me. The first night alone wasn't the worst part. The second morning was. I woke up sometime after sunrise with my mouth so dry it felt like I'd swallowed sand. My legs were stiff. My shoulders ached, and for a few seconds I couldn't remember where Richard was. Then I saw the empty side of the living room. Italy. I looked at the clock, 8:17. Normally, a home health nurse would have arrived around 9. I kept telling myself, maybe Richard had been right. Maybe they really were short-staffed. Maybe someone would show up later. By 11, I stopped believing that. The cooler beside my bed held only one sandwich and a bottle of water. I forced myself to sit up, then reached for my walker. Just standing made my vision blur. My knees protested with every tiny step across the hardwood floor. I made it halfway to the kitchen before I had to stop and lean against the wall. It amazed me how quickly illness shrank your world. A year earlier, I had walked 3 miles every Saturday morning with my neighbor Linda. Now making it 20 feet felt like climbing a mountain. I finally reached the refrigerator. There was food inside. Milk, eggs, some leftover soup, fruit. Enough that Richard could later say he'd never left me without groceries. But opening a soup can wasn't the problem. Standing long enough to heat it was. By the time I reached the microwave, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the bowl. I managed 2 spoonfuls before nausea hit. I carried the bowl back toward the sink. Halfway there, my left knee gave out. The bowl shattered. I hit the floor harder than I expected. For a long moment, I simply stayed there, not because I wanted to, because getting back up required more strength than I had. That afternoon, I missed my medication time, not intentionally. I had dropped 2 pills beneath the hospital bed earlier that morning, and crawling after them had exhausted me. When I finally reached the pill organizer again, I couldn't remember whether I'd already taken Wednesday afternoon's dose. I stared at the little plastic compartments until tears blurred the labels. 20 years ago, I coordinated emergency drills for 600 students. Now I couldn't remember if I'd swallowed one tiny tablet. Growing older can humble you in ways no one prepares you for. That evening I turned on the television, mostly because I needed another human voice in the house. The local news faded into a travel program. Then YouTube opened automatically. Richard had linked his account months earlier. The first thing on the screen made my stomach tighten. Tyler had uploaded a short video from Rome. Richard stood beside Susan outside a cafe, raising a wine glass. Susan laughed as someone behind the camera wished her a happy birthday. Richard looked happier than I'd seen him in months. The caption read just like old times. I watched it twice. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't quite believe it. Then another photo appeared. Florence. The 3 of them smiling in front of the Duomo. Another dinner in Bologna. Susan wearing a blue silk scarf. I recognized it immediately. I'd bought that scarf in Nashville 5 years earlier. After Susan complimented it at Tyler's birthday dinner, Richard had told me it disappeared during our last move. Apparently not. I switched the television off. The silence afterward somehow felt louder. The next morning, I tried reaching the front door. It took nearly 20 minutes. Every few feet, I had to stop and catch my breath. When I finally looked through the glass storm door, I noticed something sitting on the porch. A grocery bag. Kroger. Someone had delivered groceries. I couldn't reach them. I tapped weakly against the glass. No one answered. The bag remained there all afternoon. Across the street, Frank Donovan noticed it too. I learned all of this later. Frank had delivered mail in Hamilton County for almost 35 years before retiring. Nothing escaped him. Around dinner time, he walked over to Linda Perez's driveway while she was watering flower pots. "You notice Evelyn's groceries?" Linda looked toward my porch. I figured she'd already left for Ohio. Franked. "So why is the bag still there?" Linda shrugged. "Maybe Richard forgot to cancel the delivery." Frank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward my bedroom window. The light was on. It had been on since the night before. I've never known Evelyn to leave lights burning. Linda hesitated. "You think something's wrong?" "I don't know." Richard said she wanted privacy. Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "I'd rather have Evelyn mad at me for checking than spend the rest of my life wondering why I didn't." The next afternoon, they walked to my house together. Linda knocked first. "Evelyn?" "Nothing." Frank knocked harder. "Evelyn." Inside, I heard something. At first, I thought I imagined it. Then I realized they were calling my name. I tried answering. The sound that came out barely qualified as a voice. I banged my hand against the floor once, twice, 3 times. Outside, everything became quiet. For one awful second, I thought they'd left. Then I heard Frank. "Linda, call somebody." The Fischers police officer later told me they almost turned around. There were no broken windows, no obvious emergency, just a neighbor with a bad feeling. Fortunately, bad feelings are sometimes enough. After checking with dispatch and trying every entrance, they found an unlocked side door leading into the laundry room. I remember fragments after that. Heavy footsteps, someone saying, "We've got her." A paramedic kneeling beside me. Cold oxygen tubing beneath my nose. Frank standing outside the front window, with both hands clasped together. Then darkness again. When I opened my eyes, sunlight spilled across white hospital curtains. For several seconds, I had no idea where I was. A woman wearing navy scrubs smiled gently. "Good morning." My throat hurt. "What happened?" "I'm Dr. Nina Shaw." She waited until I took a sip of water. "You were brought to IU Health North yesterday." Yesterday, I had lost an entire day. Dr. Shaw pulled a chair closer. "I'm not trying to frighten you, Mrs. Carter." Her voice stayed calm. "But another 12 to 24 hours without fluids, and your medications could have caused permanent damage." I swallowed. "My husband thought I could manage." She looked down briefly at my chart. "Did your husband even know your home health visits had been canceled?" "Yes." "Who canceled them?" I stared at the blanket. "He did." She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she quietly stood. "I'd like our social worker to speak with you." Later that afternoon, Monica Reed introduced herself. She didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me like someone whose story mattered. We talked for nearly an hour. She asked gentle questions. Who handled the finances? Who controlled appointments? Who usually set up my medical equipment? Did Richard leave me another phone? No. Did I know my tablet password? No. Did anyone know I was home? I shook my head. He told the neighbors I went to Ohio. Monica wrote something on her notepad. When she looked back up, her expression had changed. Before leaving, she said softly, "Mrs. Carter, because you're considered a medically vulnerable adult, we're required to notify Adult Protective Services." The words made my stomach tighten. "I don't want him arrested." She nodded. "This isn't about punishment." "Then what is it about?" "It's about understanding exactly what happened." Just before dinner, a detective knocked lightly on my hospital room door. He introduced himself as Marcus Bell. He carried a thin folder. Inside was the cancellation notice I'd found in my kitchen. He slid it onto my tray table. "Mrs. Carter." I nodded. "Did you authorize this?" "No." He turned another page. "It also appears your husband informed multiple neighbors you had left Indiana voluntarily." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Then Detective Bell asked a question I wasn't prepared for. Mrs. Carter, has your husband ever asked you to sign documents giving him control over your finances? I remembered the blue folder, the words durable financial power of attorney. Richard pulling it away before I finished reading. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if leaving me alone had never been the real plan. Maybe I had been the plan. I didn't sleep much the second night in the hospital, not because of the nurses or the IV pump, or even the aching joints that had become my unwanted companions over the last few months. It was because I kept replaying one simple question. Why? Not why Richard went to Italy. I understood that part, painful as it was. Why had he canceled my care? Those were two very different decisions. One could be selfish. The other required planning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing beside my bed with that blue folder. Just routine paperwork. I had almost signed it. That thought frightened me more than waking up alone in my own house. The next morning, Detective Marcus Bell stopped by before breakfast. He didn't have the rushed, impatient attitude I'd expected from television police officers. He pulled up a chair instead. "How are you feeling today? Embarrassed?" He smiled a little. "I've never heard dehydration described that way." "I don't mean physically," he nodded. "I know." There was a pause. "I'd like to ask you a few questions," he said. "You can refuse any of them." I agreed. He asked about Richard's personality, our marriage, whether he had ever been physically violent. No. Threatened you? No. Controlled finances? I hesitated. Not exactly. What does not exactly mean? I sighed. I always handled our household budget, but over the last couple of years, he insisted on taking over investment decisions. Did you agree? Sometimes. Did you trust him? I looked out the window. I thought I did. After Detective Bell left, I called the only person I trusted to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. Grace Holloway. We had met 23 years earlier at a Catholic school fundraiser in Carmel. Our sons played basketball together one season before deciding they hated basketball equally. Grace eventually became an estate attorney. I became the person who always baked cookies for school events. We stayed friends anyway. When she walked into my hospital room that afternoon, she carried the same yellow legal pad she'd been using for as long as I could remember. She hugged me carefully. Then she sat down. "I'm very glad you're alive." "So am I." She opened the legal pad. "Now let's stop guessing." That was Grace. No dramatic speeches, no promises, just facts. She asked questions for almost an hour. Who owned the house jointly? Whose retirement account held the larger balance? Mine. The money had started with an inheritance from my parents, years before Richard and I married. Over time, I'd added to it through payroll deductions and conservative investments. Grace nodded. "Has Richard ever had authority over that account?" "No." "Did he ever ask?" "Not directly." "What about recently?" I remembered the blue folder again. There was paperwork. "What kind?" I didn't finish reading it. "What did you see?" "Durable financial power of attorney." Grace stopped writing. "What happened after you saw that?" "He took it away." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, "Did anyone from your investment company contact you recently?" I blinked. There was a voicemail when maybe 2 weeks ago. What did it say? I don't remember exactly. I picked up my phone from the hospital tray. The police had recovered it from Richard's at home after I gave permission to search for my belongings. Seeing it again still felt strange. I scrolled through old voicemail. There it was. Daniel Cho, my financial advisor. The message was short. "Mrs. Carter, this is Daniel. Before we process the authorization paperwork, I need to confirm a few details directly with you. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Grace slowly lowered her pen. "What authorization paperwork?" "I don't know. Let's find out." Daniel answered on the second ring. After confirming my identity, he sounded relieved. "Evelyn, I've been trying to reach you for nearly 2 weeks. I've been in the hospital." There was silence. "I wasn't told that. Who contacted you?" Richard. Grace motioned for me to put the call on speaker. Daniel continued carefully. "He submitted a durable financial power of attorney, along with instructions to transfer approximately $286,000 from your retirement investment account." I looked at Grace. She was no longer taking notes. She was listening. "I never authorized that. I suspected as much." "Why?" The signature looked unusual. Grace finally spoke. "Mr. Cho, was the transaction completed?" "No. Why not?" I requested direct verbal confirmation from Mrs. Carter before releasing funds. My heart started pounding. What did Richard tell you? Daniel hesitated. He said your health had declined rapidly. Another pause. He also said you were becoming confused. The room suddenly felt much colder. 2 hours later, Grace returned carrying printed copies Daniel had emailed. One page showed my supposed signature. At first glance, it looked convincing. The longer I stared, the more wrong it became. The shape was mine. The rhythm wasn't. Someone had copied my handwriting instead of writing naturally. Then Grace handed me another page, a cover letter Richard had written. She let me read it myself. My wife's cognitive and physical decline has accelerated significantly. Upon my return from Europe, we expect to finalize long-term incapacity planning. I read that sentence 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I finally did. He wasn't planning around my illness. He was planning around my weakness. I don't think he wanted you dead, Grace said quietly. I looked up. What? I think he wanted you frightened. She tapped the document. If you had become more dependent, if you'd been hospitalized longer, if you'd believed you couldn't manage your own affairs. He thought I'd sign. Grace nodded once. That's what this looks like. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, I became angry. Not loud, not dramatic, cold, steady. 26 years of marriage reduced to paperwork. I want to call him. Grace shook her head immediately. No, he deserves to hear my voice. He deserves many things. I stared at her. He thinks no one knows, so let him keep believing that. I don't understand. She leaned forward. Evelyn, every email he sends, every financial login, every lie he tells while he's in Italy becomes evidence. I didn't answer. You've spent your whole marriage cleaning up Richard's mistakes. She smiled gently. This time, let him make them. Recovery was slower than I wanted. Physical therapy left me exhausted. Prednisone had made my face puffy enough that I barely recognized myself in the bathroom mirror. Richard used to joke that I'd become soft. Standing there in that hospital gown, I realized something. This body had fought every single day to keep me alive. It deserved better than my embarrassment. Frank stopped by later that afternoon carrying a paper grocery bag. I brought contraband. I looked inside. Real coffee from the little cafe near the library. I laughed for the first time in weeks. I thought hospitals had coffee. They do. He pulled up a chair, but I wouldn't serve it to someone I liked. We both laughed. Then he grew serious. You owe me something. What? When you're feeling stronger? Yes. You can yell at me for sticking my nose into your business. I smiled. I don't think that's going to happen. That's disappointing. I was actually thinking of baking you a pie. Frank grinned. See, that's much better than yelling. That evening Grace called again. I found one more thing. What now? The vacation. What about it? The villa near Lake Co. I waited. It wasn't paid for with Richard's savings. Then who? There was a long silence. Finally she answered. He opened a home equity line against your house. My stomach dropped. He used your home to help pay for Susan's birthday. I closed my eyes. 26 years. Thousands of ordinary days. School concerts, mortgage payments, Christmas mornings, hospital waiting rooms, everything we'd built together. He had mortgaged our future. To celebrate his past, I looked at Grace. Don't call him. She nodded. I wasn't planning to. I took a slow breath. Let him come home believing everything went exactly the way he planned. By the time I left the rehabilitation unit in Noblesville, I had learned something I never expected to learn at 58. FamilyHealing isn't a straight line. Some mornings I could walk from my bedroom to the kitchen with only my cane. The next day, my knees would swell so badly I needed the walker again. Progress came in inches. A little farther, a little steadier, then backward. It was frustrating, especially for someone who had spent an entire career solving problems with schedules and checklists. The bodies don't care about schedules. Mine certainly didn't. Grace picked me up the morning I was discharged. You sure you don't want to stay with Carol for a while? She asked as we drove back toward Fischers. My house is home. It may not feel that way. I know, she glanced over. You also don't have to prove anything. I know that too. The truth was, I was afraid. Not of the house, of the memories waiting inside it. When Grace unlocked the front door, neither of us spoke. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Richard's reading glasses rested beside his favorite recliner. His coffee mug still sat in the sink, with a dried ring around the bottom. The blanket folded across the couch was the one I'd bought during a Costco sale 3 winters earlier. Nothing had moved. For a strange moment, it felt as though Richard might walk in carrying groceries and ask what I wanted for dinner. Then I noticed the unplugged Amazon Echo still sitting on the kitchen counter. Reality returned all at once. Grace watched me carefully. "You okay?" "I don't know." "You don't have to decide today." I slowly walked into the living room. The rented hospital bed was gone. The company had already collected it after my discharge, but the faint marks from its wheels remained on the hardwood floor. I stood there for nearly the minute, not crying, just remembering. There was an overwhelming urge to clean everything, wash the coffee cup, throw away old mail, rearrange furniture, open every window. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I left almost everything exactly where it was. Grace smiled when she noticed. "Good. I've spent half my life cleaning up after Richard, and now I look toward the kitchen. This time, I took a slow breath. I'm leaving the mess exactly where he made it." Recovery became my full-time job. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday Grace drove me at first, to physical therapy. The exercises looked ridiculous. Standing from a chair without using my hands, balancing on one foot for 10 seconds, walking between orange cones like someone taking a driver's test. The young therapist, Melissa, couldn't have been older than 30. She celebrated every tiny improvement. 2 more seconds today. "You lifted your left foot much better. Look how much smoother that turn was." Sometimes I appreciated her optimism. Sometimes I wanted to throw one of the exercise bands at her. Mostly I appreciated that she never treated me like I was broken, just recovering. Grace handled everything else. She contacted my investment advisor, changed passwords, locked online access, notified the bank that no transfers were authorized without speaking directly to me. She also filed legal separation and temporary financial protections. When she explained each step, she never promised an easy victory. "The evidence is good," she said, "but courts move slowly, so I shouldn't expect miracles." "No," she smiled, "you should expect paperwork." That made me laugh. It was exactly the kind of answer a lawyer would give. Richard, meanwhile, continued emailing me from Italy. He assumed I wasn't answering because I was stubborn, not because I was building a case. His first message was almost cheerful. "Hope you're feeling better. We'll talk when I get home." The next one sounded annoyed. "Grace has no business interfering in our marriage." Then another. "You've made changes to our accounts without discussing them." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Our accounts. Not my retirement account. Not my inheritance. Our accounts. Grace read it and quietly saved another copy. Every message helps. A week later, Tyler finally called my sister Carol. I didn't hear about it until afterward. Carol told me the entire conversation. "Tyler asked how you were doing in Ohio." She laughed once. "I told him I hadn't seen you since Thanksgiving." "What did he say?" "He got very quiet. Apparently, he confronted Richard that same evening somewhere outside Florence. Richard brushed him off." Carol's confused. Tyler wasn't convinced. The following day, he saw Richard checking my investment account on his laptop. When Tyler asked why, Richard answered too quickly. "Medical bills." Tyler later admitted that answer didn't feel right. He secretly took a picture of the computer screen while Richard stepped away to answer a phone call. At the time, Tyler still didn't understand what he was looking at. He only knew his father suddenly seemed nervous whenever Indiana appeared on his phone. Susan was beginning to notice changes too. She had spent most of the vacation, assuming Richard wanted to reconnect with her. One evening near Lake Co, after too much wine, she asked him directly, "So, is this where we admit we still belong together?" Richard almost choked on his drink. Tyler told me later it was one of the most awkward silences he'd ever witnessed. Finally, Richard laughed. "Oh, Susan, what? Let's not complicate a good arrangement. Arrangement, not relationship. Arrangement." Susan said almost nothing for the rest of dinner. For the first time, she realized she might not be the center of Richard's plans either. One afternoon, Frank knocked on my door, carrying a bag of tomato plants. "I bought too many. You always buy too many." "I was hoping you'd forget," I smiled. We planted them together in the small raised garden beside my patio. Mostly Frank dug. Mostly I supervised. I'm still recovering, I reminded him. I know, you seem suspiciously happy about doing all the work. I spent 35 years carrying mail. He shrugged. This is easier. When we finished, I sat on the porch catching my breath. Frank looked across the street toward his own house. You know what? I keep thinking about that day. The welfare check. He nodded. I almost listened to Richard. I looked at him. But you didn't. No. He smiled softly. My wife always said I'd make a terrible gossip because I never knew when to mind my own business. You saved my life. He looked uncomfortable. I just knocked on a door. No. I shook my head. You decided I was worth bothering. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. Sometimes silence says enough. The day before Richard was due home, Grace came by carrying another folder. Not blue this time, brown? Everything's ready. I looked at the stack of documents. Medical records, financial statements, emails, phone records, photographs, Tyler's screenshot, statements from Carol, statements from Frank and Linda, the home health cancellation, months of my marriage reduced to paper. Grace closed the folder. I need to ask you one last time. What? Are you sure? I understood the question. Once Richard walked through that front door, nothing would ever return to the way it had been. I looked around the living room at the photographs. The wedding picture, Tyler's graduation portrait, the quilt my mother had sewn before she died. Then I remembered sitting alone on that kitchen floor, unable to reach a phone. I've never been more sure. That night, just before bed, an email appeared from Richard. We need to discuss the foolish financial changes you've made before I get home. I smiled for the first time since he left for Italy. He still believed he was coming home to a frightened wife. He had absolutely no idea that he was walking into the first day of a completely different life. 42 days after Richard left for Italy, he landed at Indianapolis International Airport, believing he was coming home to exactly the life he'd left behind. I know that because Tyler told me later. Richard joked with the ride-share driver about jet lag. He complained that American coffee wasn't as good as espresso in Milan. He even talked about taking me out to dinner once I was feeling less dramatic. The driver laughed politely. Richard had no idea his world had already shifted beneath his feet. I was sitting at my dining room table when Grace glanced at her watch. He just landed. I nodded. My hands were cold despite the warm June afternoon. Grace noticed. Nervous, terrified. That's as normal. What if I can't do this? She closed her folder. You've already done the hardest part. I don't think surviving was the hardest part. She smiled gently. No, it was deciding you deserved better. I looked away before she saw my eyes fill with tears. Tyler and Susan had arrived 20 minutes earlier. Neither of them looked comfortable. Tyler hadn't slept much during the flight home. That much was obvious. He walked over to me carrying a paper cup from Starbucks. I remembered, he said quietly. What? You always order a tall Pike Place with one cream. I looked at the cup. You remembered? I remembered a lot of things on the flight, for a sec. For a second, neither of us knew what else to say. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry. I appreciated the apology. I just wasn't ready to answer it. Susan remained near the living room window. She looked older than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. The confident woman from Richard's vacation photos had disappeared somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. Finally, she spoke. I honestly believed you decided not to come. I couldn't. Richard had never told her that. Instead, he'd said I preferred staying home, that I hated traveling, that I wanted him to reconnect with his first family. Susan slowly shook her head. I asked him 3 different times if you were okay, and he said your sister was taking care of you. She looked directly at me. I should have called Carol myself. I appreciated her honesty. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just acknowledging her own mistake. A little before 4, Detective Marcus Bell arrived. He wasn't there to create a scene. He simply wanted to speak with Richard once he returned. Grace reviewed the documents one last time. Home health cancellation, financial records, statements, emails, Tyler S. photograph, the unsigned power of attorney paperwork. Everything was organized in neat folders. Years of trust, 42 days of deception, hundreds of pages. Outside across the street, Frank was watering his lawn. He'd already watered it once that morning. When I pointed that out, he shrugged. My tomatoes don't need me today. I laughed. You're terrible at pretending. I've never claimed otherwise. He looked toward my house. You sure you don't want Linda here too? Too many people? This isn't a parade. No, it's just the end. At exactly 4:36 p.m., Grace looked out the front window. He's here. No one moved. I heard a car door close, then another. A suitcase rolled across the sidewalk, the same sound I'd heard 42 days earlier, leaving my house. Only this time, it was coming back. Richard walked up the front steps, wearing the same navy travel jacket. His skin looked slightly darker from the Italian sun. He appeared rested, relaxed, completely unaware. He inserted his key into the front door, turned it, nothing. He frowned, tried again, still nothing. Then he noticed the small envelope taped beside the doorbell. Inside was Grace's business card. Across the back, she'd written one sentence: "Please knock." Richard stared at it for several seconds. Then he knocked, not angrily, just confused. I stood slowly, picked up my cane, walked to the door, and opened it. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. His face completely changed. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Simply all the confidence disappeared. I'm home. He blinked several times. I know what you thought. His eyes moved past me into the house. Grace, Tyler, Susan, Detective Bell. He looked back at me. What is this? I stepped aside. Come in. Richard entered cautiously. The front door closed behind him. He set his suitcase beside the stairs. No one offered him a seat. Grace spoke first. Mr. Carter, I don't know who you think you are. I'm Evelyn's attorney. His eyes narrowed. For what? Grace calmly opened the first folder. I think you already know. Richard looked at me. Evelyn, whatever she's told you, I interrupted quietly. I lived it. Silence. Grace slid one document across the dining table. The cancellation of Mrs. B. Carter's home health services. Richard barely looked at it. She was staying with her sister. Grace placed another statement beside it. Carol Williams confirms Mrs. Carter never arrived in Ohio. Richard hesitated. Plans changed. Detective Bell finally spoke. Before or after you informed two neighbors she had already left, Richard looked toward him. I don't answer questions without a lawyer. That's your right. Bell remained perfectly calm. But we're not finished. Grace opened the second folder. This concerns your wife's retirement account. Richard's shoulders stiffened. I was helping manage family finances. Evelyn never authorized a durable financial power of attorney. It was being discussed. Grace slid forward. Daniel Cho's affidavit. The financial advisor requested direct confirmation because he questioned the signature. Richard didn't answer. Then came Tyler. He quietly placed his phone on the table. I took this in Florence. The screen showed Richard's laptop. My investment account. Pending transfer. Richard turned toward him. You went through my computer. I took one picture. You had no right. Tyler looked him straight in the eyes. You had no right either. Richard finally looked back at me. His voice softened. Evelyn, you misunderstood. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked one question. When you left, what exactly did you think was going to happen? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I thought you'd realize you needed me. The room became perfectly still. Not one person spoke because somehow that answer was worse than saying nothing. He hadn't planned for me to recover. He hadn't even planned for me to remain independent. He expected fear to do what love no longer could. Susan slowly stood. I have one question. Richard rubbed his forehead. Not now. No. She folded her arms. Now, she looked directly at Grace. Who paid for the villa? Grace quietly handed her several bank statements and fierce Susan studied them. Her expression slowly hardened. This says, she looked at Richard. You borrowed against your house? Our house? I corrected. Grace nodded. The home equity line was opened without Evelyn's knowledge. Susan looked sick. You told me she booked the villa. I booked it, I said softly. 3 years ago. Everyone turned toward me. It was supposed to be our retirement trip. Richard looked down. I convinced Evelyn to postpone it, Susan whispered. So you canceled the trip, then used her house to pay for my birthday. Nobody answered. There wasn't anything left to say. Richard suddenly looked older, much older. He turned toward me one last time. We can still fix this. I shook my head. No, for 26 years. His voice cracked. I've taken care of this family. I met his eyes. No, Richard. You expected us to take care of you. Grace quietly closed the final folder. Detective Bell stepped forward. Mr. Carter, I'd like to speak with you downtown regarding several matters related to this investigation. Richard looked around the room. No one defended him. No one followed him. As he picked up his suitcase, Frank happened to glance over from across the street. He realized he'd been watering exactly the same patch of grass for nearly 15 minutes. Richard muttered under his breath. "That's going to be one expensive water bill." Frank shrugged. "Worth every penny." Richard walked away, carrying the same suitcase he'd rolled past my hospital bed 42 days earlier. This time, everything he still had left fit inside it. People often imagine that revenge feels like fireworks. It doesn't, at least not the kind that lasts. For me, it felt more like opening the curtains after a long winter. Nothing exploded. The room simply became brighter. Richard spent the next several months trying to convince everyone that there had been a misunderstanding. He told friends our marriage had been strained by my illness. He told relatives Grace had manipulated me. He even claimed Tyler had turned against him because I had poisoned him with lies. The problem with that story was simple. Documents don't get emotional. Emails don't forget. Bank records don't change their minds. Every explanation Richard offered eventually ran into paperwork that told a different story. Adult Protective Services completed their investigation 6 weeks later. I wasn't present when Richard gave his statement, but Detective Bell called afterward. "The investigation is finished," he said. "And they found enough evidence to conclude that you were placed at substantial risk through the intentional cancellation of essential care services." I closed my eyes, not because I was happy, because someone had finally called it what it was: risk. Not bad luck, not a misunderstanding, not poor communication. A choice. The civil case took much longer. Grace warned me it would. "Courtrooms aren't television," she liked to say. "They're mostly calendars." She wasn't wrong. There were motions, depositions, financial disclosures, endless requests for documents. Richard hired an attorney who tried very hard to paint me as an emotional woman recovering from illness. Then Daniel Cho testified. He explained why he refused to process the transfer from my retirement account. The signature appeared inconsistent with Mrs. Carter's prior documents. "Why didn't you simply process it?" Richard's attorney asked. Daniel answered calmly. "Because protecting clients is part of my job." That single sentence carried more weight than an hour of arguments. The home equity line became another problem for Richard. The judge ruled that the debt had been obtained without my informed consent. Responsibility for most of it remained his. When Grace told me, she smiled only a little. "Justice isn't always dramatic." "No, it's usually paperwork." We both laughed. Some jokes never got old. Richard also lost his position at the financial consulting firm where he'd worked for nearly 18 years. Not immediately. His employer conducted an internal ethics review after learning about the investigation and the attempted transfer involving my retirement account. 3 months later, he was asked to resign. When people in town heard about it, several asked whether I felt satisfied. That wasn't the right word. Satisfied suggested I had been waiting for him to suffer. I hadn't. I had been waiting to feel safe. Those are different things. Tyler called every Sunday for almost 2 months before I finally invited him over. He arrived carrying a peach pie from a bakery in Carmel. "Addie, I remembered you liked peach better than apple." "You've been remembering a lot lately." "I've had time to think." We sat on the back patio overlooking the small garden Frank and I had planted. The tomato vines were already climbing their cages. Tyler stared at them for a long time. "I should have called you." "You should have." "I believe Dad." "I know." He looked down. "I saw things in Italy that didn't make sense. I wish you'd trusted yourself." There was a long silence. Finally, he said the words I think he'd been carrying for weeks. "I can't change what I did." "No, but I don't want to lose you, too." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You already lost the version of me who fixed everyone's mistakes." He nodded slowly. "I think that's probably good for both of us." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Those only happen in movies, but it was honest. Sometimes honesty is enough to begin again. Susan surprised me the most. One afternoon, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "Evelyn. I spent years believing Richard was the one person who truly understood me. During that trip, I slowly realized he wasn't interested in understanding anyone. He only wanted people to fit the role he assigned them. I'm sorry I accepted his version of your life without asking you. You deserved better from both of us. There was no request to meet, no attempt to become friends, just accountability. I appreciated that. I folded the note and placed it inside my desk drawer. Some apologies don't erase the past. They simply stop adding to it. Autumn arrived quietly in Indiana. The maple tree in my front yard turned deep orange. The air smelled like dry leaves and wood smoke. My strength returned little by little. I no longer needed the walker. Most days I used only a cane. Some afternoons I didn't need that either. Melissa, my physical therapist, celebrated the first time I climbed an entire flight of stairs without stopping. I knew you'd get here, I smiled. I wasn't always so sure, she laughed. That's why you had me. One Saturday morning, Frank wandered into my backyard carrying 2 cups of coffee. You busy? I was pulling weeds. Those weeds can wait. We sat beside the raised garden, watching birds hop through the grass. The tomatoes had long since been harvested. Now chrysanthemums filled the flower beds. Frank looked around. You know what? This place feels different. It is. No. He shook his head. I mean you. I thought about that for a moment. Maybe he was right. Illness had changed me. Betrayal had changed me. Surviving had changed me. But those things hadn't taken everything. They had simply stripped away the habit of apologizing for existing. A few weeks after the divorce became final, Grace handed me one last envelope. It came from Richard. I looked at it without opening it. You read it? Only enough to confirm there weren't legal issues. What does he want? To explain himself. I stared at the envelope for a long moment, then I handed it back. I don't need another explanation, Grace smiled. I hoped you'd say that. She fed it into the small shredder in her office. Tiny white pieces fluttered into the bin. Snorts, that was the end of it. Not with anger, not with shouting, just with a decision. The following spring, I planted a row of blue hydrangeas beside the front porch. The same porch where Richard had rolled his suitcase toward the driveway nearly a year earlier. Every morning, I watered them before breakfast. Every afternoon, I watched new blossoms appear. Healing, I learned, looks a lot like gardening. You don't force it. You simply keep showing up. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that kindness should never require you to surrender your dignity, and love should never ask you to disappear. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone broke your trust, I hope you remember that it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me. I truly hope my story reminds you that quiet strength can change the course of a life. At my mother's 80th birthday dinner, my new stepdaughter raised her glass and called me Dad's retirement plan. When I asked her to apologize, my husband laughed and said, "She's not your daughter, Evie. Don't correct her." That was the moment something inside me went very still. Not broken, not angry. Exactly. Still. We were sitting in a private room at the Oakwood Chop House in Carmel, Indiana. I had spent 3 weeks arranging that dinner for my mother, Linda. I called twice to make sure the entrance was easy for her walker, asked for a chair with firm support, and brought a small cushion from home, because her new knee still stiffened if she sat too long. The restaurant had soft yellow lighting, dark wood walls, and white tablecloths that made everybody sit a little straighter. My sister Carol had brought a bouquet of pink roses. My son Daniel had driven over from Fischers after work, still wearing the clean navy polo he kept in his truck for family events. It should have been a good night. The Grant's daughter, Madison, arrived 40 minutes late. She swept into the room wearing a cream-colored coat I had helped pay for at Christmas and carrying a handbag that cost more than my first washing machine. She kissed her father on the cheek, gave my mother a quick little wave, and said, "Sorry, parking was insane." Parking was not insane. The lot had been half empty when she walked in, but I said nothing. I was trying very hard in those days to be what people called a good stepmother. Madison was 21, a junior at Northgate University, and according to Grant, she had struggled after her parents' divorce. I told myself patience was part of blending a family, so I paid for things. At first, it was small. A phone bill, a dental co-a, a few hundred for textbooks. Then came tuition installments, sorority dues, car insurance, the Jeep payment, and a monthly allowance Grant said would help Madison focus on school. "You're giving her a real chance," he used to tell me. I liked hearing that. After 12 years as a widow, it felt good to believe I was building something again. Dinner went smoothly for maybe 20 minutes. My mother told a story about getting pulled over in 1968 while driving my father's Plymouth without a license. Daniel teased her about being a criminal. Even Grant laughed. Then Daniel asked Madison how her business classes were going. Madison glanced up from her phone. "They're fine. College is pretty easy when Dad marries a woman who loves spreadsheets and automatic payments." Daniel stopped smiling. Carol lowered her water glass slowly. Grant gave a short laugh, the kind people use when they want everyone else to accept that something cruel was only a joke. I looked at Madison. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "Nothing. I'm saying you're organized. That isn't what you said." "Oh, come on, Evie." My mother shifted in her chair. She was trying not to make a scene on her own birthday, which made me even angrier. Then Madison lifted her wine glass. "To Dad," she said. "He finally found a retirement plan with excellent credit." No one laughed that time. I could hear silverware touching plates in the main dining room outside. Somewhere near the kitchen, a waiter dropped something metal. I put down my fork. "Madison, apologize." Her eyebrows rose. "For what?" "For insulting me in front of my family. And for doing it at my mother's birthday dinner." She looked at Grant. That was when he placed his hand over my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to stop me from moving. "She's not your daughter, Evie," he said. "Don't correct her." He said it loudly. That was the part I remembered later. Not only the words, but the volume. He wanted everyone at that table to understand where I stood. I looked down at his hand covering mine. My fingers were already aching from the cold weather, and the pressure made the joints throb. "Take your hand off me," I said. He did, but rolled his eyes. "You're turning a joke into a family crisis." Madison leaned back in her chair, satisfied. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I wish I could tell you I delivered some brilliant response right there. I didn't. My face was hot, and my thoughts were stumbling over each other. Then I looked at my mother. She wasn't embarrassed by me, she was worried for me. That helped. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. "All right," I said. "Then I won't be expected to support her like one." Grant laughed again. "Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not being ridiculous." Madison shook her head and picked up her phone as if I had become boring. The rest of the dinner was stiff and miserable. My mother opened her gifts. We sang Happy Birthday. Carol cut the cake while Grant talked too loudly about the weather. I paid the final bill because my card was already on file. On the drive home, Grant waited until we were past the third roundabout before starting. "You embarrassed me tonight." I stared through the windshield. "I embarrassed you. You challenged my daughter in front of everyone. She insulted me. She made a joke. And you told me I had no place correcting her. You don't. Not like that." I turned toward him. "But I do have a place paying her bills." He tightened both hands around the steering wheel. "Let's not punish a kid over one stupid comment. She's 21. She's still in school." There it was. The shift from independent adult to helpless child, depending on who owed whom an apology. Grant exhaled sharply. "Her tuition payment is due Friday. Don't do anything emotional." I looked back out the window. She became a kid again the moment a bill was due. That shut him up for the rest of the drive. The next morning, I woke at 5:38 with my lower back burning. I made coffee, pressed a heating pad behind me, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. At 6:12, I pulled up 22 months of bank statements. I had always kept good records. Payroll work teaches you that numbers may be boring, but they are rarely confused. The list was worse than I expected. Tuition, Jeep payment, insurance, $900 a month for living expenses, phone service, sorority dues, dental bills, a study abroad deposit. Then I saw several transfers marked MH Education, nearly $30,000. But the recipient wasn't Northgate University. The money had gone into an account connected to Grant's real estate business. My hand rested over the computer mouse. For a moment, I nearly closed the page. I remembered Grant sitting beside me on the anniversary of my first husband's death. I remembered him making dinner when my sciatica was bad. I remembered how relieved I had felt to be loved again. Then I remembered his hand over my wrist. I channeled the future payments I legally controlled. I removed Madison as an authorized user on my credit card. I stopped the allowance. I ended the automatic Jeep payment. I redirected my consulting income into an account Grant could not access. I did not take her car. I did not call the school. I simply stopped volunteering my money. At 7:03, Grant came into the kitchen holding his phone. "What the hell did you do?" I turned the laptop toward him and spread the printed statements across the table. "I followed your boundary," I said. "She isn't my daughter, you're her father." His anger lasted about 5 seconds. Then his eyes landed on the transfers. The color left his face. I tapped the page with one finger. "Why did nearly $30,000, marked for Madison's education, go into your business account?" Grant reached across the table and tried to grab the statements. I pulled them back. And that was when I knew the insult at dinner was no longer the biggest problem in my marriage. Grant's hand stopped halfway across the table. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he sat back and gave me the expression I had seen him use with nervous clients, the calm, slightly disappointed look of a man explaining something obvious to someone who had failed to understand. "That is not my business," he said. I turned the statement around and pointed to the name Holloway Commercial Holdings. "It's an operating account for your business. It's more complicated than that." Of course it was. According to Grant, anything involving his money was complicated. Anything involving mine was family. He pulled out the chair across from me and lowered his voice. "I moved the tuition money into an education reserve so I could manage the deadlines." "Then show me the reserve." "I don't have access to everything from my phone. You have your laptop upstairs." His jaw tightened. "Evie, I am not going to be interrogated in my own kitchen. It's my kitchen, too." That landed harder than I intended. His eyes flicked toward the cabinets, the hardwood floor, the breakfast nook I had renovated 6 years before meeting him. The house had belonged to me long before Grant did. He stood. "You're making a serious mistake." "No," I said. "I'm finally reading the statements." He left without breakfast. At 10:17 that morning, Madison called. I was in my office reconciling payroll for a dental practice when her name appeared on my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "My card isn't working." "No." "Hello." No question about my mother. "Just the card, I know." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "You know, I removed you as an authorized user." "Why?" I leaned back in my chair and felt the familiar pinch run down my right leg. "Because your father made it clear I'm not your parent." "That has nothing to do with my card." "It has everything to do with my card." She lowered her voice, probably because she was standing near other people. "I'm at Cedar Grove Outlet. I already bought lunch and now I can't pay for the clothes." "Then don't buy them. You can't just do this without warning. I warned you last night. You were being dramatic and now I'm being clear." She hung up on me. By noon, she had posted something online about older women who used money to control younger women. She did not mention my name, but she did not need to. Grant's sister Denise called 20 minutes later. "I just saw Madison's post." "What is going on?" I stopped paying some of her expenses. Denise made a shocked sound. "Evie, you can't pretend to be family and then abandon a child because she hurt your feelings. She is 21. She is still in college. She has a father and a mother. You know Marlene can't afford tuition. Then Grant will have to." The silence on the other end told me Denise knew something I did not. "Grant has had a rough year," she said carefully. "So have I. That's different. You've always been good with money." I nearly laughed. That seemed to be the family's entire financial philosophy. Evie was good with money, so Evie could absorb whatever everyone else had done with theirs. After we hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen. I had expected anger from Grant and Madison. I had not expected the immediate chorus of relatives telling me I was cruel. For 10 minutes, I considered restoring the tuition transfer. Then Daniel called. "Grandma told me what happened." I sighed. "She shouldn't have involved you." "She didn't. Aunt Carol did." "That sounds right." He hesitated. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. You don't sound fine." I rubbed my forehead. "I may have overreacted." "No, you didn't. You weren't there for the conversation this morning." "I was there last night." His certainty irritated me. "Try not to sound so pleased." "I'm not pleased. You warned me about Grant from the beginning." "I'm sure this is very satisfying." Daniel went quiet. "That's not fair, Mom." I knew it the moment I said it, but pride kept me from apologizing. He ended the call a minute later. By 3, I had managed to hurt the one person who was actually trying to help me. The next morning, I met with Tina Wallace at my bank near Keystone Parkway. Tina had helped me open my business account 11 years earlier. She wore reading glasses on a silver chain and remembered every client's children. She could not tell me anything about Grant's private accounts. She did, however, help me review transactions from the accounts that belonged to me. We went through 22 months line by line. The total made my stomach drop. $84,000. Some of it had gone where Grant said it would. Northgate University, the Jeep lender, Madison's phone company, but several transfers went to his brokerage business, a commercial loan seeker, and an account marked only with the initials MB. I thought about the furnace repairman who had told me the heat exchanger might not last another winter. Grant had said we should wait. Madison's education came first. I thought about the physical therapy sessions I canceled because the COA felt wasteful. Madison's education came first. I thought about Grant's new Lexus parked in our garage. Tina closed the folder gently. You need an attorney. That afternoon, Grant discovered the premium cable package had been canceled. He marched into the kitchen holding the remote. Did you do this too? Yes, I was watching that. You can watch basic cable. This is childish. 2 days later, I stood behind him at Market District while he argued with a cashier because an 87-cent digital coupon would not load. The cashier looked exhausted. Grant kept tapping his phone. It says it's valid, Grant. I said, let it go. It's the principle. Outside, I looked at him over the grocery cart. You never checked prices when the money came from my account. That's not the same thing. No, I said. Apparently it was easier. That evening, Madison came to the house with a friend waiting in the driveway. I need the Jeep keys. I don't have them. You stopped the payments. The Jeep is titled to your father. She turned toward Grant. He was standing near the hallway pretending to read an email. Dad. He cleared his throat. The vehicle may need to be returned temporarily. Madison stared at him. You said Evie had enough money to cover everything until graduation. The room went still. Grant's face hardened. Go wait in the car. No, you said, she agreed. I looked at Madison. I agreed to help based on what I was told. You chose to pay, she shot back. Yes, I said, and now I'm choosing to stop. She left angry, but not before looking at her father in a way she never had before. That night, Grant sent me 6 text messages from the guest room. You are destroying this family. You are humiliating Madison. You have no idea what my business requires. I finally typed back, you stole from me, lied to your daughter, and used my dead husband's money to impress people. The next morning, attorney Nathan Kim read the message and shook his head. Do not argue with him in writing again. He deserved worse. I'm sure he did, but every angry sentence can be printed without the 10 lies that came before it. Nathan helped me freeze my credit and review my financial records. That was when we found the request to add Grant as a joint owner to one of my investment accounts. The company had rejected it because the signature did not match. Nathan placed the form beside an older document I had actually signed. The good news is no money moved, he said. Then he pointed to a handwritten note at the bottom. The bad news is whoever submitted this knew the exact value of the account. Only 2 people had seen that statement, me and my husband. I drove home from Nathan's office with the radio off. Normally, I liked having something on in the car. Old country music, local news, even commercials gave my mind something else to hold on to. That afternoon, I wanted silence. The rejected investment form sat inside a manila folder on the passenger seat. Someone had tried to add Grant to one of my investment accounts. The request had failed because the signature didn't match. No money had been taken. Nathan reminded me that didn't automatically prove Grant had personally signed anything. Someone from his office could have submitted it. It might eventually become a criminal matter, or it might never be possible to prove exactly who filled out the paperwork. But one thing was already certain. Someone close enough to my life knew the exact balance of that account. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for several minutes without getting out. At 58 years old, I had spent my entire career helping small businesses avoid payroll mistakes. I caught missing decimal points, I noticed duplicate invoices. I could usually tell when a number didn't belong. Yet somehow, I had missed the biggest fraud in my own life. That hurt more than losing the money. The next few days settled into a miserable routine. Grant stayed in the guest room. We spoke only when absolutely necessary. He became strangely polite, not warm, not apologetic polite. He'd ask if I wanted coffee. He'd tell me dinner was in the refrigerator. He even folded the towels one evening. 2 weeks earlier, I probably would have thought those were signs he wanted to fix our marriage. Now they felt like negotiations. Every kindness came with invisible paperwork attached. Meanwhile, my body was beginning to protest. Hours spent reviewing statements made my lower back scream. My hands stiffened from sorting documents into folders. Some nights I slept only 3 or 4 hours. One Thursday evening, I carried a bottle of laundry detergent downstairs. Halfway down, my sciatica caught me. The bottle slipped. Blue detergent spread across the basement floor. I stared at it. Then I slowly sat down on the bottom step and cried. Not because of the detergent, not even because of the money. I cried because I kept asking myself the same question. How could I have been this stupid? I hated that question. It echoed around my head for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, I reached for my phone. It was 1:47 in the morning. I called Carol. She answered on the third ring. Evie, I'm sorry. What's wrong? I tried to laugh. Instead, I started crying again. Tell me the truth. About what? Did everyone see what Grant was except me? Carol didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. No, it feels like they did. No, then why didn't I? Because he wasn't pretending all the time. I frowned. What? He really was kind to you sometimes. That surprised me. Carol continued. People like Grant aren't monsters every minute of every day. If they were, nobody would stay. I wiped my face. You aren't foolish because someone lied to you. I feel foolish, I know. She let the silence settle. Then she added something I'll never forget. Being lonely after losing Paul wasn't a character flaw. That sentence stayed with me. Grant started telling a different story. Not to me, to everyone else. A week later, one of our neighbors stopped me while I was getting the mail. How are you feeling? I'm fine. You've just seemed overwhelmed lately. I looked at him. What makes you say that? He shifted uncomfortably. Grant mentioned, You've been under a lot of stress. That was all he said. But I heard the rest. Later that afternoon, another acquaintance casually asked whether I planned to slow down at work. The following day, a client emailed to make sure I wasn't retiring. Little comments, small questions, none of them sounded alarming by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern. Grant wasn't simply defending himself. He was preparing people not to believe me. The idea made my stomach tighten. I had watched 2 close friends care for spouses with dementia. Memory loss terrified people our age. Grant knew that. He wasn't accusing me outright. He was planting doubt. A few days later, something happened that surprised me. Madison called. I'd like to talk. I think we've said enough. Please. There was something different in her voice. Less confidence, less anger, more uncertainty. We agreed to meet Saturday morning at the Panera in Broad Ripple. She was already there when I arrived. No makeup, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, an old Northgate University sweatshirt instead of designer clothes. She looked tired, very tired. She stood awkwardly when I approached. I already ordered your coffee. Thank you. We sat down for almost a full minute. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. I got a notice from school. I waited. If my account isn't brought current, she looked down. I can't register next semester. What did your father say? I've called him 12 times. 12? He says he's working on financing, and I saw pictures online. She swallowed. He was at some networking reception. Not meeting lenders, not fixing tuition, networking. The realization had finally reached her. I took a careful sip of coffee. I'm sorry, she looked surprised. You are? I don't want your education destroyed, but you still won't pay. No. She nodded slowly. I figured. Another long silence. Then she reached into her backpack. I need to show you something. She placed several printed emails on the table. They're from Dad. I picked up the first page. My heart began beating faster. One message discussed my consulting business. Another referred to my Carmel house. Then I found the sentence that made my stomach turn. Once Evie signs the updated estate plan, we won't have to keep asking permission. I stared at it. What estate plan? Madison frowned. I thought you'd already agreed. I've never seen this, she blinked. What? I turned the pages toward her. This draft leaves Grant with broad control over my business if I die first. Her face lost color. He told me what he said. You wanted everything to stay in the family. It is in the family. I pointed to the trust documents Nathan had copied for me. This house belongs to the Mercer Family Trust. She looked genuinely confused. I thought, I know. She leaned back. I thought Daniel was already taken care of. I shook my head. Grant told you that. She nodded. And he said I wouldn't need student loans because you wanted to help me. I looked out the window. Cars rolled through Broad Ripple as though nothing in the world had changed. Finally, I asked quietly, why are you showing me this? She hesitated. Because yesterday, she stopped. What happened yesterday? He asked me to sign something. A statement saying you always knew where the money went. The words landed between us. You didn't sign it. No. Why not? She looked embarrassed. Because she took a shaky breath. He wouldn't answer my calls until he needed something. For the first time since I'd met Madison, I saw not an entitled young woman, but a daughter realizing she had been useful before she had been loved. I felt sorry for her. That didn't erase what she'd done. You charged things to my credit card. I know you insulted me. I know you treated kindness like it was automatic. She nodded. I did. I folded the emails carefully. I appreciate you bringing these. She looked hopeful. Does that mean you're not mad anymore? I met her eyes. I'm still very angry. Her shoulders dropped, but I continued. I'm willing to believe you can become someone different. She nodded once. I'd like that. Before we left, I said one more thing. You'll still need to repay the personal charges you made. I figured. No arguments. A tiny smile appeared. I was going to argue. What changed? She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. I think I'm done believing everything Dad says. That wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was simply the first honest sentence she'd spoken to me. 2 days later, Nathan called. I've spoken with Marlene Brooks, Grant's ex-wife. She kept everything, Nathan said. Everything. Emails, financial records, divorce filings. What did she say? She said Grant did almost exactly the same thing during their marriage. I closed my eyes. Nathan continued. She also confirmed something else. What? Several transfers you believed were paying Madison's education were actually being used to satisfy Grant's obligations from his divorce settlement. I leaned back in my chair. Oppie, the money hadn't just disappeared. It had been keeping Grant's entire life from falling apart. Before I could answer, my office phone rang. The caller ID read Arthur Sloan Hardware Supply. I answered, Arthur. His familiar growly voice came through the speaker. Evie, we need to talk. Of course, I think your husband made a mistake. What happened? He called me. My heart began pounding. He told me you're declining. I closed my eyes. Arthur continued quietly. And sweetheart, he paused. He left the whole thing on voicemail. Arthur Sloan almost never called me directly. He usually emailed payroll questions or left short voicemail messages that ended with no rush. So when he said, we need to talk, I knew it wasn't about payroll. Are you free this afternoon? He asked. I can be. I'd rather not discuss this over the phone. His voice sounded calm, but there was something underneath it, not fear, disappointment. Arthur had owned Sloan Hardware Supply for more than 40 years. He'd buried his wife after a long fight with Alzheimer's disease, survived bypass surgery, and still insisted on walking through his warehouse every Tuesday morning with a portable oxygen tank, instead of riding the golf cart his employees begged him to use. He wasn't easily rattled. If Grant had upset Arthur, Grant had made a very serious mistake. The Arthur's office sat just east of downtown Indianapolis. When I arrived, he was already waiting with 2 cups of coffee. I remembered, he said with a faint smile. 1 cream. You always do. He lowered himself into his chair slowly, adjusting the oxygen tubing beneath his nose. I owe you an apology. For what? I almost believed him. I felt my stomach tighten. What exactly did Grant tell you? Arthur reached for his phone. He said he was calling as a friend. He pressed play. Grant's voice filled the office. Arthur, I don't want to alarm you, but Evie's been under a tremendous amount of stress. She's getting forgetful. Nothing dangerous yet, but I thought you deserved a heads up before payroll season gets busy. You may want to think about transitioning to someone else before things become complicated. The message ended. Arthur looked at me. I've known you 15 years. I couldn't speak. I've watched you catch payroll errors that saved me thousands of dollars. I nodded. You've corrected my tax accountant twice, I remember. You once called me from a hospital waiting room because you noticed one employee's overtime looked wrong. I laughed weakly. My mother was getting her knee replaced, and you still noticed? He leaned forward. My Eleanor had dementia. The room became very quiet, I know. No, sweetheart. His voice softened. You don't. He rested both hands on his cane. I know what early dementia looks like. He paused. You don't have it. The words broke something inside me. Not because I had truly believed I was losing my memory, because I suddenly realized how many people Grant had probably told. How many conversations had started with, I'm worried about Evie. Arthur slid a folder across the desk. That's a copy of the voicemail. You're giving this to me. You're my payroll manager. He smiled sadly. And my friend. Nathan listened to the recording twice, then a third time. Finally, he removed his glasses. This is better than I expected. I thought you'd be furious. I am. He folded his hands. But I'm also practical. What do you mean? The voicemail doesn't prove fraud. I know. It doesn't prove forgery. I know. But it does establish a pattern. He pointed toward my notebook. Grant isn't simply defending himself. He's trying to destroy my credibility. Nathan nodded. And your business. He explained everything carefully. The rejected investment authorization was still under review by the investment company's fraud department. I had already filed a police report, so there would be an official record. Whether investigators could ever prove who physically completed or submitted the paperwork remained uncertain. Nathan refused to promise an arrest. That isn't how the real world works. Oddly enough, hearing that reassured me. He wasn't selling revenge. He was helping me rebuild my life. The stronger case, he continued, is civil. He listed everything on a yellow legal pad. Your separate funds entered Grant's business after misleading explanations. He represented educational expenses that weren't educational expenses. He attempted to damage your professional reputation. We have documentary evidence. We have witnesses. We have banking records. He looked up. That's enough to change your future. Not necessarily Grant's, mine. A week later, I filed for legal separation. Nathan also requested temporary financial restraints, a forensic accounting, preservation of electronic records, and exclusive control over my consulting business. Signing the paperwork felt strangely ordinary. No dramatic music, no shaking hands, just a blue pen attached to the attorney's conference table. 22 months of marriage reduced to several signatures. When I finished, Nathan quietly slid a tissue box toward me. I hadn't realized I was crying. Grant changed almost overnight. The yelling disappeared. Instead, flowers appeared on the kitchen counter. He cooked chicken parmesan one evening. Another night, he warmed a towel in the dryer because he knew the heat helped my hands. You've been working too hard, he said gently. I can manage. You shouldn't have to. For a few dangerous days, I wanted to believe him. Loneliness does strange things after 50. It whispers. It reminds you how quiet the house becomes after dinner. How much easier it is to forgive than to start over. One evening, we actually laughed together while watching an old episode of Frasier. For 30 minutes, everything felt almost normal. Then he reached into his briefcase. I need your help with something. He placed several documents on the kitchen table. Commercial refinancing paperwork, the collateral, my house. Our house? He corrected. No, Evie, my house. It'll only be temporary. How temporary? Until this development closes. I looked at the projected loan amount. It would pay off business debt. It would also cover Madison's overdue tuition. You planned this? What? The dinner? The apology? The flowers? His face hardened just enough. You're being cynical. No. I closed the folder. You were being patient. He sighed dramatically. I thought we were finally healing. You thought I was finally signing. Then he crossed a line I never expected. Paul would have helped. The room went completely silent. Paul, my first husband, the man I'd buried after 34 years of marriage. Grant actually used his name. I doubt Paul would have let his family fall apart over money. I stood so quickly my chair scraped across the hardwood floor. Do not. He blinked. Evie, do not use my husband's name to sell me your debt. I picked up the bouquet sitting beside the sink. The roses he'd brought me that morning. Without thinking, I dropped them into the trash. For 1 second, I saw genuine surprise on his face. Not because I'd thrown away flowers, because I'd stopped playing the role he'd written for me. That night, Daniel came over. He didn't lecture me. He didn't remind me that he'd warned me. He simply replaced the broken latch on my back gate. Afterward, we sat on the back porch. "I owe you an apology," I said. "You don't, I do." He smiled. I wasn't happy to be right. I know. I was scared. I looked at him. Of what? That someone would hurt you? I stared into the backyard. I kept thinking everyone must believe I'm an idiot. Daniel shook his head. No. Then what? I think they believe exactly what I believe. And what's that? He looked at me for a long moment. You missed being loved. I covered my eyes. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder. That isn't the same thing as being stupid. 3 days later, Nathan called again. The Central Indiana Business Leadership Award luncheon is next Friday. I remembered Grant had been talking about it for months. He still expects you to attend. I know. He also told the organizers, "You've had a stressful few weeks, but you're eager to support him publicly." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. He wants me standing beside him. He wants your credibility standing beside him. Nathan paused. I have an idea. We met that afternoon. His advice surprised me. You're not going there to destroy him. I'm not? No. He leaned across his desk. You're going there to stop protecting him. There was a difference, a very important one. The following Tuesday morning, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Madison stood there holding a small suitcase. Her eyes were red from crying. My dad changed the locks, she whispered. He said if I was choosing you, I could live with the consequences. I looked at the suitcase, then back at her. No, I said quietly. You're finally living with his. When people imagine revenge, they usually picture shouting, a dramatic speech, someone getting slapped, someone getting arrested. Real life almost never works that way. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to stand where someone expects you to stand. That Friday morning, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, fastening a pair of pearl earrings Paul had given me on our 25th anniversary. My fingers ached. Arthritis had a way of reminding me that even ordinary tasks took longer than they used to. Behind me, Madison stood awkwardly in the hallway. You don't have to go, she said. Yes, I answered. I kind of wish you wouldn't. I smiled faintly. So do I. Daniel drove me to the Meridian Grand Hotel downtown. Nathan had insisted. No surprises, he'd said. Don't arrive alone. When we reached the entrance, Daniel turned off the engine. You nervous? I laughed quietly. I've been nervous for 3 weeks. He reached over and squeezed my hand. No matter what happens in there, he paused. I'm proud of you. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that. The ballroom looked exactly like every business luncheon I'd ever attended. Round tables, white tablecloths, coffee cups, tiny cheesecakes waiting for dessert. About 200 people filled the room. Bankers, business owners, accountants, insurance agents, people who had trusted me with payroll records for years. Grant was already standing near the stage shaking hands. When he saw me, he smiled immediately. There was the charming businessman everyone admired. He walked over, kissed my cheek for the photographers, and whispered, I knew you'd come. I said I would. He smiled wider. I told everyone you've had a difficult few weeks. I'm aware. He adjusted his tie. Let's keep today positive. Then, without changing his pleasant expression, he leaned closer, smile. I looked directly into his eyes. Why? So, everyone knows you overreacted. For just a moment, I almost walked away. Not because I was afraid of him. Because I was tired. Tired of explaining, tired of paperwork, tired of wondering whether people believed me. Then I remembered something my mother had said while we were replacing batteries in her television remote a few nights earlier. You don't have to prove you're brave every day. She had smiled. You just have to stop volunteering for the same humiliation. I walked toward the stage. The program began exactly on schedule. Announcements, sponsors, scholarships, community awards. Finally, the master of ceremonies smiled toward me. Mrs. Holloway has kindly agreed to introduce this year's Business Leadership Award recipient. Bill applause. I walked to the podium. For a second, I looked across the room. I recognized dozens of faces, people I'd worked beside for years, people who trusted me with payroll taxes, retirement deductions, and employee records. Then I began. Marriage has an interesting way of blending reputations. The room became quiet. For nearly 2 years, many people assumed that because I stood beside my husband, I approved of every business decision he made. I paused. I've realized that's no longer true. No one moved. I continued calmly. My husband publicly informed me that I had no parental role in helping raise his adult daughter. Grant shifted in his chair. I accepted that boundary. I stopped voluntarily paying expenses that belonged to her parents. Several people exchanged confused glances. Afterward, I learned that money I believed was supporting educational expenses had also been directed elsewhere. Grant stood. Evie. I raised one hand. I'm almost finished. The room was so quiet I could hear silverware touching china somewhere near the back. I also discovered an unauthorized request involving one of my investment accounts. I chose every word carefully. The matter has been reported and remains under review. I did not accuse him of forgery. Nathan had been very clear. Facts. Only facts. I've also filed for legal separation and requested a forensic accounting. Grant reached the stage. That's enough. I looked at him. No. Then I said the sentence I'd practiced all week. I came today because my presence has been used as proof that everything in our marriage and our finances is perfectly normal. I looked around the ballroom. It isn't. I stepped away from the microphone. I'm no longer willing to lend my name to that story. I returned toward my chair. The applause never came. Neither did the outrage, just silence. Grant grabbed the microphone. I'm sorry, he said with an embarrassed laugh. My wife has been under tremendous emotional stress. He smiled sympathetically toward the audience. Many of you know her mother has experienced health issues. My jaw tightened. Sometimes family situations become overwhelming. I'd sighed dramatically. We've been trying to handle this privately. He looked directly at me. And unfortunately, confusion sometimes looks like certainty. Several people looked uncertain. For one awful moment, I thought it had worked. The master of ceremonies awkwardly suggested everyone continue lunch while the program paused. Grant walked back toward me. I told you. He smiled. You've embarrassed yourself. Then a chair scraped across the ballroom. Arthur Sloane slowly stood. The room recognized him immediately. Everyone in local business knew Arthur. He didn't hurry, didn't raise his voice, didn't ask for the microphone. He simply held up his cell phone. I received a voicemail Tuesday morning. Grant froze. Arthur looked around the room. My late wife spent 7 years living with Alzheimer's disease. His voice remained calm. I don't appreciate people borrowing that tragedy because they don't like being questioned. He pressed play. Grant's voice carried clearly across the nearest tables. Evie is getting forgetful. You may want to think about transitioning your payroll before things become complicated. The recording lasted less than 20 seconds. It didn't need to be longer. People sitting nearby heard every word. Those farther away saw the expressions on everyone else's faces. The whispers spread through the ballroom faster than any loudspeaker ever could. Arthur slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then he looked directly at Grant. I've trusted that woman with my payroll for 15 years. He paused. I trust her today. He sat down. Grant tried to laugh. Arthur misunderstood. No, everyone turned. Madison had stood. She was trembling. I misunderstood. She held several printed emails. My father told me Evie had agreed to change her estate plan. She swallowed. He told me her business, her house would eventually belong to our family. She looked at me. She never agreed. Grant stared at his daughter. What are you doing? Telling the truth. I paid for everything you have. Madison's eyes filled with tears. No. She shook her head slowly. She did. The room fell silent again. No one applauded. No one cheered. Real life doesn't sound like movies. It sounds like people quietly realizing they've been lied to. The president of the business association walked onto the stage. In light of information brought forward today, he said carefully, the board will postpone today's Business Leadership Award, pending further review. That was all. No public condemnation, no dramatic verdict, just consequences beginning. Grant looked around the ballroom. Several people avoided his eyes. One lender quietly left. A longtime client who usually greeted him with a handshake walked past without stopping. Another approached me instead. Evie, he said softly. Are our payroll records secure? Yes, they always have been. He nodded. I thought so. The divorce took almost 11 months. A forensic accountant traced a large portion of my money into Grant's struggling development company. Some had covered legitimate household expenses. Much of it had not. The Snort's investigation into the investment paperwork continued for quite a while. Ultimately, investigators could not prove beyond question who physically prepared or submitted the rejected authorization. Although it had originated from an email account connected to Grant's office, Bathis, faced with civil discovery, Grant eventually agreed to a financial settlement. I recovered part of my savings, not all of it. Attorney fees consumed far more than I'd hoped. Justice is expensive. Grant's largest development collapsed within the year. He sold the Lexus. He moved into a modest apartment. Madison took a semester away from Northgate University. She moved in with her mother. She worked in the campus bookstore, took out student loans, and signed a repayment agreement for the personal charges she'd made on my credit card. Once a month, we met for coffee. At first, we mostly discussed receipts and budgets. Months later, she quietly said something I'd waited a long time to hear. "I treated your kindness like proof you were weak." I smiled. "No, it was proof I trusted the wrong person." She nodded. "I won't make that mistake again." Neither would I. Daniel helped me repaint the guest room. I finally replaced the old furnace I'd postponed repairing. My physical therapist joked that my back seemed to improve once I stopped carrying everyone else's problems. She wasn't entirely wrong. A few months later, I took my mother away for a quiet weekend. We walked slowly through the hotel lobby. She rubbed her knee. I rubbed my hands. She smiled. "Getting older hurts in places you didn't know existed." I laughed. "At least now I'm only paying for my own aches." She squeezed my arm. "That's progress." It was. Looking back now, I don't think the best part of my story was watching Grant lose an award or a business deal or even a marriage. The best part was realizing that kindness doesn't require endless sacrifice and love doesn't require surrendering your judgment. If you've ever had someone mistake your generosity for an obligation, I hope you remember this. Setting a boundary may cost you a relationship, but it can save your self-respect. And sometimes that's the beginning of a better life.